It's 3 o'clock, you're finished with your homework, and you have the rest of the day to do whatever you want. You hop on your Nintendo Wii to look for any new videos on the Nintendo channel. Or maybe instead you check out some me's on the Check Me Out channel. Or maybe even mess around with some pictures in the photo channel. Or better yet, actually play a game. Whatever you decided to do, even if it was just messing around in one of the many channels the Wii had to offer, you were surrounded by music that was unlike any other console. The Wii had this unique atmosphere that bridges the gap between major changes in technology, having a nostalgic yet futuristic style, kind of like the Jetsons, projecting what people in the past imagined the future to be like. As the Wii grows older, my appreciation of the console grows with it, and I realize more and more how much of a revolutionary system it really was, even if that comparison's been done to death in reference to its beta name. Its music really was a step up from its predecessor, and I think hits the late majority of the innovation curve for console video game music. It left such an impact on its generation that some of its music has outlived the Wii's lifespan itself, with the current generation still enjoying classics such as the Wii Shop channel theme and the Mi channel theme, sometimes even in a new way. Games for the Wii had a variety of pretty complex and even modern music for its age. You had a live orchestrated soundtrack with Super Mario Galaxy, funky house beats in Wii Sports, modernized spins on older tracks with Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and even wild breakcore bangers in Pokemon Rumble. But that's just scratching the surface. The Wii had relatively low storage even for its time, yet it can hold hundreds of hours worth of songs. Well, how did the Wii get such amazing music in its channels and WiiWare under such tight restrictions, and yet such rich soundtracks in its physical releases? It's actually a little bit more complicated than you might think. The way music's played on the Wii can be divided into 2 categories: streamed and sequenced. In short, before I go into more detail, streamed songs are large sound files, yet have a lot more room for complexity, like a full orchestra in Super Mario Galaxy, while sequenced songs are way smaller in size and have more room for creative and dynamic playback at the cost of complexity. Streamed audio in general refers to pre-rendered audio like an MP3 or a WAV file. As the Wii's discs were upgraded to 4.7 GB from the GameCube's 1.4 GB mini discs, there was a lot more room to store music as streamed sound in retail disc games. These streamed sound files are usually stored individually in labeled folders on the discs, rather than inside of a proprietary archive. They were typically encoded at a sample rate of 32,000 kHz, which means there's no unique audio content past 16,000 kHz, which plenty of people can hear past and could notice missing frequencies. Are you able to hear this? That's the range of frequencies that would be lost. Though some games, like Super Paper Mario, have music that's played at a much lower sample rate, like 22.05 kHz, which would be losing content past 11,025 Hz, missing this range of frequencies. BRSTM files are the most common format you'll find streamed audio in on the Wii. They can have 3 different types of compression despite being in the same file container. There's ADPCM, PCM16, and PCM8. PCM16 and 8 are lossless compression types, meaning there's no quality loss during conversion, assuming the sample rate and bit depth are the same, with their respective numbers referring to their bit depth. PCM is a pretty common compression format in general, and is even what CDs use. ADPCM is a lossy compression type that's much more efficient in size, saving at least 71% of space in the worst of cases, at the cost of added noise and artifacts in more complex sounds. You'll find a mix of ADPCM and PCM16 encoded songs in various Nintendo-developed games, but not really PCM8, because when the bit depth gets that low, it brings in some very obvious distortion and noise, like this. Inside the header of the BRSTM files, where technical information about the track is stored, there's a bit more information than your average sound file, such as at what point the song should loop, whether or not it should loop, and even whether or not the game is Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Maybe. One of my favorite features in the BRSTM format is support for multiple audio tracks. A notable use of this can be found in Wii Sports Resort. The title theme and the options theme are in one file with 4 tracks, or 2 stereo tracks. One half is the song you hear in the title screen and game selection, and the other half plays in the options menu. It's a similar yet different spin on the title half, following the same structure, but with entirely new instruments playing different melodies. The game plays all 4 tracks at once, starting with the second half's volume down, but smoothly fades between the two depending on whether you're in the main menu or in the options menu. Interestingly, the very beginning of the options track is left unheard in-game because by the time you're able to go to the options screen, the beginning has already passed, but this is what it sounds like. AST files are only found in a handful of games on the Wii, with some notable ones being The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess and the Super Mario Galaxy games. They're basically just another container for PCM16 and ADPCM encoded audio. It's an older format that was originally introduced in GameCube games like Mario Kart Double Dash, and mostly appears in games with early development on the Wii. These sound files were created using a private SDK by Nintendo called J-System, which was eventually superseded by Nintendoware, Nintendo's middleware development kit, something I'll get into more detail on soon. WSD streams, an abbreviation of wavesound, are one of the most uncommon ways to play music on the Wii. They're pretty much functionally the same as BRSTM files, being a container for the same compression types, but are instead encoded inside of BRSAR archives. These wave sound streams are usually meant to be used for sound effects and other short sounds, but are sometimes used for fanfares or even short songs, like the tutorial theme from Wii Sports. Now we get into the intermediary between streamed audio and sequenced audio. The BRSAR format is a specific type of archive that holds a lot of different files related to audio and music, including information on outside BRSTM files. To even be able to play a BRSTM, the game finds it through a BRSAR and plays it through that. In total, BRSARs hold wave sound streams, players, sequences, sequence banks, and data on BRSTM files. Sequenced music refers to songs played back using musical note data and short, usually looping, audio samples. The engine reads the note data and plays each sampled instrument pitch to the notes in real time. This is very effective for saving space, since the note data is in the kilobyte range, and the instrument samples are usually just a few megabytes, if that, and can be reused across many songs. For example, the Mi channel's BRSAR is only 503 kilobytes, and that's including the sound effects for the Mi channel as well. An example of sequenced playback that some of you may be familiar with is using MIDI and sound fonts. It's basically the same technology in practice. Similarly to MIDI, these sequences have a limit of 16 channels, meaning you can have up to 16 instruments playing at once per song. The Wii only had about 512 megabytes of NAND flash storage, which means there wasn't really much room for streamed music in its channels and WiiWare, especially considering one game's soundtrack can be twice as big as the system's entire storage if in the format of streamed audio, like in the case of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. Nintendo's solution was to create a versatile sound engine in their development kit, Nintendoware for Revolution. It allowed developers to import MIDI files for the sequences and WAV, AIFF, or even DLS files, which are similar to sound fonts, for the instrument sound banks. It's also how BRSTM files are created, simply allowing the developer to import WAV or AIFF files, set the loop points, and then export it to its final format with the BRSAR and the BRSTM file structure. Though it's worth noting that some third-party developers opted to use their own sound engine entirely. When it comes to the samples Nintendo used for the sound banks of the sequenced instruments, they tended to get them from 3 types of sources: sample CDs, ROM-port boxes or keyboards, and modern digital instrument libraries. For example, in the Mi Plaza theme, the plucked pizzicato strings were sampled from Peter Sudlikic's Advanced Orchestra, which is a sample CD from 1997, and the main streams from the Yamaha S90, which was marketed as a workstation keyboard and came with loads of sampled instruments built in. This keyboard is also the source of the main lead from the Wii Shop Channel theme, as well as dozens of other instruments found in music around various Wii channels. RSEQ sequences hold note data, and RBNK banks hold sound data, with the sequences holding data on which banks to use for which notes. Those 2 formats are what imported MIDIs and samples get turned into respectively. RSEQ sequences also hold a few other settings, like the starting volume and which player to use. As their name suggests, players are directly responsible for playing everything, whether streamed or sequenced. Up to 4 can be played at once, and they have a lot of parameters to change in each one, such as volume, pitch, pan, and lots of filters. sort of reminiscent of a mixing console. You can also use them to route audio to the Wii remotes or any of the effect buses. However, the actual player presets saved in the BRSAR files are pretty minimal themselves, only holding the name of the player and a couple of technical settings. They don't actually hold any of the settings to do with volume, pitch, pan, or the filters. There's also a global tempo value that adjusts the playback speed of all sequences for all players without affecting the pitch of the sequences. The sequence editor and player has features you would expect from a basic sampler. You can assign particular samples to ranges of keys and velocities, so you could have one sample played and pitched across all the keys, which wouldn't sound very realistic. Or you could go as extreme as to assign a different sample per key, and several loudness variations in the velocity range, as you would see in high-quality instrument libraries for samplers today. Ideally for the Wii, there's a sweet spot between the two. It also has your standard envelope settings: attack, hold, decay, sustain, and release, allowing you to shape the sounds exactly how you'd want. Understandably, there's a lack of advanced sampling features, such as round robins. When you press a key, round robins cycle through different provided samples of the same key and velocity to sound less robotic and more like a real instrument, which would have a slight change in sound each time a note would be played. If you've ever seen any game music uploaded on YouTube by a channel called Siva Gunner, they're able to make some of their parody songs because of them being originally sequenced. As I mentioned before, sequenced formats in games are similar to MIDI files and sound fonts, often because they're made with similar formats. So it's possible to convert the game files to them, toss them inside of a modern DAW, and change the notes around. That's how I made my own parody edit of the Wii Shop channel theme. Having songs played as sequences gives a lot of creative possibilities for music that would be much more impractical with streamed files, especially at the time. You can easily disable any individual track or instrument with a quick command from the game's code. A good example of this is the cycling theme from Wii Sports Resort, where different tracks are enabled or disabled depending on various events going on in-game. Developers can even have it so the song progresses throughout different parts depending on events happening in the game to sync up with the gameplay, like in Art Style Orbiant, where as you progress through the level, the song also progresses. The downside is you have a lot less freedom with effects and complexity. In streamed audio, I can make a song with a million things playing at once if I, for some reason, wanted to, and I could individually tailor and shape each sound to be exactly how I want. This is likely a factor as to why most music is streamed in modern games instead of sequenced, but also because it's generally more work to create sequenced music. A creative use of sequenced music can be seen in the WiiWare games Mega Man 9 and 10. The games were made to represent the style of Mega Man 2 on the NES, with the classic 8-bit graphics and chiptune sound. The original Mega Man games used the NES's sound chip, the Rico 2A03, to actually generate the waveforms live, rather than having its music as a streamed audio file or sequencing short audio samples. It's kind of like a tiny little synthesizer in a chip, but it has a unique sound from the way it converts digital pulses to analog. According to comments made by the game's developers in the booklet of the Mega Man 9 OST, they were originally planning on implementing an emulated NES sound engine, but couldn't due to time constraints. They instead ended up sampling sound effects in waveforms from what seems to be private software they described as being meant to closely resemble the console's sound source. They then arranged the songs on PCs and finally implemented them with the Nintendo Wii development kit. In Mega Man 9, they chose to only use 2 samples pitched halfway across the keyboard each to represent each waveform, which unfortunately has drawbacks with the specific samples they used. The program they used to generate the waves rolls off the high end to mimic the output sound of an NES. However, this means as they play different notes with the same sample, pitching them up higher and higher, the high-end roll-off gets pitched up as well, leaving you with a brighter high-end in the higher notes, or potentially the opposite problem, a loss of high-end in the lower notes. This also leaves a jarring difference between 2 notes where the sample selection changes, like this. It seems they were aware of this to some degree, because in Mega Man 10 they upped the sample count to 6 per instrument to cover the keyboard, although there's still the same noticeable problems to a slightly less degree. Arguably even worse when it comes to sample selection changes, since there's more of them. They could have gotten a more consistent sound by rendering the samples without the low-pass filter in their software, and instead using the low-pass filter that comes built in with the players, which means every note would have had the same consistent roll-off in the high end, regardless of it being high or low, just like on a real NES. Although I don't have insight that deep into their development, so they may have chosen specifically not to do that for a good reason. Another game that pushed the boundaries in its limitations was Pokémon Rumble. It's a spin-off in the Pokémon series with relatively simple gameplay. You hit Pokémon and you win. But it surprisingly has a great soundtrack and has a few tracks with sequence breakbeats in them, which really makes them stand out. Let's take a look at how they work in the Mewtwo battle theme, which is one of my favorite songs in the game. The breakbeats are created by splitting a sample drum loop into 4 cuts: the kick, hat, a soft snare hit, and a hard snare hit. The source of the drum loop is actually a well-known and widely used sample from a drum break in the song Amen Brother from the Winstons, which is sort of ironic considering how protective Nintendo can be with their IPs, yet here they are technically using an unlicensed sample where the original artist never so much as saw a penny of the royalties, to the point where their drummer, Gregory Coleman, died homeless. The drums have been processed probably with some mixture of EQ, compression, and saturation, likely included that way on some sample CD the producers used. Here's a rough recreation of the processing that was done on it. Playing my recreation at the same time as the samples from the Pokémon Rumble with mine phase inverted causes audible phasing, which would only happen if the samples were very close to identical. This pretty much confirms it really is the almond break and not just a similar drum break, if there ever was any doubt. Each of the drum samples are assigned to and pitched across a pretty large range of keys to allow for some cool pitching effects simply by playing different keys. One of the more notable features shipped with the Nintendo Air 4 Revolution development kit is its DSP engine. DSP, which stands for Digital Signal Processing, basically refers to digital audio effects as a whole in this context. The Wii effectively allows for up to 9 different effects through 3 effect buses that can hold up to 3 different effects each, although the third bus is disabled if Dolby Pro Logic 2 is being used, since it makes everything audio-related use more CPU entirely. The routing works through sends and buses. Turning up the send value to a bus duplicates and sends the audio through it, with the value adjusting the volume to that bus. So if we have bus A with a reverb effect on it, turning up the bus A sends value will raise the amount of reverb we hear. You can also send audio to the Wii Remote, as I mentioned earlier. However, it's directly through its own bus and can't receive audio output from any of the effect buses. With this system, you could do something like lowering the main, or dry, send value, while keeping the send value to an effect bus with reverb on it up to get a fully wet reverb effect. There's 4 DSP effects available: a high-quality reverb, a low-quality reverb, a chorus, and a delay. The lower quality reverb saves around a third of the CPU usage compared to the higher quality one, but sounds noticeably worse, even with similar settings. Here's an example track to show each of them off in practice. I'll cycle through all the effects at their default settings. This is it dry, with the high quality reverb, the low quality reverb, the chorus, and the delay. Outside of these buses, each of the 4 players comes with a dedicated low-pass filter, a bi-quadratic filter that can be set to a high-pass, low-pass, or 3 types of bandpass filters, along with settings for pitch, pan, and surround pan. There's also the ability for developers to implement support for Dolby Pro Logic 2. This is a surround sound DSP engine that takes a stereo signal, processes the audio based on its content, and splits it into 5 channels. You'd need a surround sound setup that supports DPL2, and then you need to enable it in the game settings. Although it was only supported in a handful of Wii and GameCube games, the general consensus seems to be that it's worth using, although I haven't tried it myself. DSP effect bus parameters can't be set inside of BRSAR or BRSTM files. Instead, they have to be set by the game's code. Allowing effect changes from the game's code gives developers a realm of possibilities to create immersive audio experiences, such as ideas like introducing reverb when entering a cave or using a low-pass filter on a sound behind a wall. Considering most uses of the DSP engine with music were to simply add reverb or delay, it would have been nice to allow effect settings to be saved in BRSAR files. It's caused problems for those who've wanted to share the Wii's music, such as those who uploaded Wii soundtracks on YouTube. It's incredibly hard to find the values of these effects since they're buried deeply inside of compiled code. To get around this, some of the oldest Wii soundtracks were uploaded on YouTube by editing the BRSAR files to remove all sound effects, patching in the modded BRSAR with Homebrew on a modded Wii, and directly recording the songs while actually playing through the game. It gave the most accurate sound possible, but at the cost of potentially missing some songs, added noise from the unbalanced RCA cables the Wii used, as well as various imperfections from the Wii's digital to analog conversion process, though some may consider those imperfections to only add to the accuracy. A well-known use of one of Nintendo Ware's DSP effects is the bowling theme from Wii Sports. If you were to look it up on YouTube right now, you'd likely find the song sounding pretty clean, and it sounds nice this way, but that's not actually how it sounds in-game. Instead, it sounds like it's being played through big speakers inside of a bowling alley. It works by routing the song through one of the effect buses with reverb settings to simulate how sound would reflect in a large room. In Wii Sports Resort, they actually rendered the streamed audio with a reverb effect baked in for the bowling theme, rather than using the DSP effects. Even though it's on the same engine, and they could have used the same technique as in the original Wii Sports, they probably did it this way to optimize CPU usage. We'll likely never get to hear what that version sounds like clean, although that's probably not too big of a deal since it's not nearly as good as the bowling theme from Wii Sports. With the advancement of Nintendo consoles allowing for larger digital games and software, the art of sequenced music is becoming a curiosity of the past. Although it can still occasionally be seen in newer games, such as WarioWare Get It Together for the Nintendo Switch, which uses sequences for the several hundred smaller tracks in the game. But generally, it's becoming increasingly rare. Most games that previously relied on it, such as the Animal Crossing series, moved to a fully streamed format for the newest generation. This is likely because of the added time it takes to program sequenced music, to extract or record the samples needed for each instrument, and to export all the MIDIs and assign them to their proper banks. Not to mention the improvement of quality with streamed audio on the Nintendo Switch, even allowing for sample rates up to 48 kHz. Maybe it's nostalgia or something otherwise clouding my judgment, but there's just something kind of special about the idea of music being played live from a video game's sound engine. It feels like an authentic touch, like the console itself is working to provide me with amazing music. Just the way it sounds, the way the samples change between notes, reminiscent of listening to MIDI files years ago. I'm happy we were able to see as many improvements as we did up to the Wii, but I can't help but wonder, what if the technology progressed along with what we have today in production environments? Maybe we could have seen hyper-realistic music played while adapting to our gameplay in ways just not possible with streamed music, while also taking up less space. Thanks for watching. This is my first time making a video like this. I'm a little nervous with it being such a different kind of video compared to the rest of my entire channel. If you enjoyed it and want to see more content like this from me, technical video game music type videos, be sure and leave a like so I know this is something people want to watch. Extra thanks to anyone watching or listening this far in, and shout out to, I don't know, PewDiePie.